After years of issues within the Department of Juvenile Services,
everyone is concerned about juvenile crime. There's no one in this role as prosecutors that's not concerned about juvenile crime.
And concerns from state's attorneys across Maryland.
I'm a firm believer that the old proverb that says, you know, a fish rots from the head down. I think that's what we're seeing with DJS.
DJS has a new leader, bringing some new hope for change.
Well, look, we're cautiously optimistic.
We're sitting down with a group of Maryland's top prosecutors, talking about the changes they say need to be made to curb the juvenile crime problem. This is a Fox 45 News, Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm Mackenzie Frost. More than a week after Governor Wes Moore announced Betsy Fox Tolentino would take over as the new head of the Department of Juvenile Services, we're sitting down with state's attorneys from across the state to talk about the problems within the department and the changes they'd like to see under the new secretary. Joining me tonight is Baltimore City State's Attorney and President of the Maryland State's Attorneys Association, Ivan Bates, Wacomico County State's Attorney Jamie Dykes, Howard County State's Attorney Rich Gibson, and Carroll County State's Attorney Haven Shoemaker. Thank you all for joining us. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I did invite the acting DJS Secretary Betsy Fox Tolentino to join us for this discussion. She declined our invitation, but a spokesperson tells me they are working on setting up an interview with us, so we hope that happens soon. All right, let's begin this conversation. So we have a new acting secretary for the Department of Juvenile Services. Let's just start by going down the line, and we'll start with City State's Attorney Ivan Bates. How are you feeling about this new leadership, and have you had an opportunity, I understand, to at least some prosecutors to speak with her, correct?
Yes, some prosecutors within our organization have. I have not. I haven't spoken with her. I know the head of our juvenile division knows her. I think they've previously interacted before. So we're cautiously optimistic. You know, I think that without a doubt, you'll see some change. What is that going to be enough change? Where's the change going to be? I think one of the things that you may see change with specifically is maybe programming. I think everybody agrees we're not trying to lock up young people, but we're trying to hold them accountable and make sure they get the programming and the services that they need.
State's Attorney Dykes, when it comes to what you're seeing in your jurisdiction, what changes do you believe need to happen sooner rather than later to address some of the problems?
I agree with Ivan. Programming has to be it. You know, resources on the Lower Eastern Shore especially are scant. If we are going to be successful and grow healthy families, healthy children, and communities, it is going to be in the quality of services that are available to them.
State's Attorney Gibson?
I mean, same thing. I think that we need quality programming. We need, I think one thing that I'd like to see is actually investment on the front end, so mentoring. Programming mentoring to reach these kids that are on the bubble, that are facing challenge, that's going to guide them in a different path. Hopefully that would prevent them from coming before us in the criminal setting. And that's something I hope they invest heavily in.
Well, her background is working with an organization, ROCA, that specializes in, high-risk youth and preventing them from getting involved in violence. Do you think that she would lean on that experience to, do exactly what you're talking about?
I hope so. The primary thing that I'm hoping that Secretary Tolentino brings is a new philosophy as it relates to the youth. Her predecessor had a very hands-off approach and was not really engaging the kids when we needed to. There was a lot of passing on any kind of actual accountability, passing on any actual interaction. And I'm hoping that we can have meaningful preventative measures put in place so that our kids can be corrected if they're doing wrong, guided towards right choices, and hopefully put on a positive path towards the future.
State's Attorney Shoemaker, at the top of this town hall, you said that you believe that, the organization rots from the top down. With this new leader, how long do you think it'll take before some of those problems are fixed if they are deep-rooted and the organization has some of those problems that go back, potentially months or even years?
Well, I think if the new secretary signals that there's a philosophical shift, like Rich just alluded to a moment ago, then I hope that'll percolate down to the boots on the ground at the local level, because that's the problem that we had under Secretary Schiraldi. It was a top-down driven philosophy that, no juveniles really should be detained under any circumstances, no matter what danger they pose to the public. He was just philosophically opposed to the notion. And I think that certainly needs to change.
Looking at how the decisions are made when it comes to detention, that has been a conversation that I've had with several of you and lawmakers. What needs to change, or do you believe that there needs to be a change from the department, or is it a lawmaker issue when it comes to making that decision about whether a juvenile is detained? Is it a policy? Is it something that the department needs to do? Does DJS need to be taken out of that, role altogether? What do you guys think?
Well, to me, it's a policy, and I think to all of us, we believe it's a policy change. The way the system works now is when a young person is arrested, say on a felony, violent crime, or a handgun, DJS has the opportunity to decide whether they're going to release that young person, or they can take them before the court. Now, if the police say we want this young person to be taken to the court, underneath the law, they're supposed to, within a day or two, take that young person before the court. And just last week, we had a case in Baltimore City where we had a 15-year-old arrested on attempt murder, if I'm not mistaken. They wanted this young person to be taken before the court. DJS released them. This young person just didn't come back to court. And so what we're saying, if they change their policy that says if it's a violent crime, if it's a felony, or it's a handgun, every single case should go before the juvenile magistrate or the court. Allow a third party to make that decision. No different than the adult system. DJS and the public defender can advocate on behalf of the young person. The prosecutors will advocate on behalf of the community and the citizens. And the court or magistrate will make the decision about what's in the best interest of the community for public safety and that child.
Do you agree?
Yes, I think this is something that can be done today. So I'm not saying they should do this, but should at least consider it heavily. Because it's an executive action in essence. You can legislate these changes, but legislation is a much slower process. There's a lot of things get watered down and shifted about when you're legislating things to get to conclusion, to get a bill to pass. This is something they have the ability to from an executive position say, for any violent crimes, if a child is alleged to have robbed someone, right? We are going to allow a court entity, magistrate or judge, to decide what the best course of action is after a hearing, as opposed to a DJS intake worker making the call and handling it in-house. It's purely a policy that can be decided from the executive, right? And so that's something they can do rather quickly. Summer's upon us. We're probably going to see, as is typical, some increase in juvenile crime. And so I think that it's something they should definitely consider.
But if that doesn't happen and we continue to see some of the same problems that historically have played out, is it the responsibility of the General Assembly to step in and require DJS to do that?
I think so. However, getting stuff through the Maryland General Assembly that's even remotely not criminal coddling in nature is a tall order. So, it may be that may be a tough road to hoe, but I absolutely agree with Ivan's approach. He was the first one that I heard bandy this about, and, I kind of stole your idea, Ivan, a couple of times. But in any event, any juvenile charged with a felony or a crime of violence, and I would include second-degree assault in that, should be required to appear before a judicial officer and should be detained until they have the opportunity to appear in front of said judicial officer, to allow us, the state's attorneys, the opportunity to weigh in on behalf of the public, and then, and the defense attorney as well, to offer their input. And then the judicial officer can make a determination as to whether this person should be released out into the public or not.
Who is making the decision at the Department of Juvenile Services? Is it is it the caseworker? Is it somebody who has experience working in the criminal justice, system?
They use a diagnostic, I can't recall
it's a rubric system.
Yeah, that is, it affords very little discretion that if this, then that, as I understand it. So the courts are focused, as Ivan and all of us have indicated, on public safety. That is a consideration, and there has to be accountability for DJS. So in this, a simple step to allow the court to weigh in is an accountability, is a check and balance on DJS, and is in the best interest of not only the public generally, but these juveniles who are at risk. Another
point I would just add to that, Jamie, is also DJS has a voice in that space as well. So in that, it's not just the prosecutor and public defender. DJS has the ability to offer their opinion as to what happens in that courtroom setting. So they're not losing their ability to impact the outcome of the cases, but they are allowing other entities that are interested in that outcome to have a voice.
Why is all of this happening over the last couple of years? This conversation with juvenile crime, why are we seeing these problems now? Or is this a new problem with the previous Secretary Vincent Schiraldi? Or is this something that really has been a long-standing problem that has only recently gotten attention?
There were legislative changes in 2023.
Was it that?
2022.
Was that really the driving factor?
Yes.
Okay.
That has really impacted all of this. And then, of course, you had Schiraldi's appointment on top of it, and it's compounded.
I'll just add that juvenile crime, kids violating the rules, violating the laws, is not new.
Right.
Since the dawn of time, children have done wrong things, right? Have violated order and laws. The issue is that, and I'll even add this too, factually speaking, the total volume of crime is actually down. So across the country, crime is down. Juvenile crime's also down. But the kinds of crimes that juveniles commit are far more egregious than they were in the past. All right, this technology has shifted. So you have access to cell phones, so you can organize flash mobs to commit a organized, orchestrated robbery of a store. You have YouTube videos that can show you how to break into cars. One barrier to committing crime is the knowledge of how to commit the crime in the first place, but now that knowledge is readily available to lots of kids. You also have prevalence of ghost guns. So you have prevalence of the ability to make a gun with a device the size of a microwave that is a highly lethal weapon. So all these things are driving some of the issues we're seeing right now.
Sure, hold that thought. I want to continue this conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back with the state's attorneys right after this. Welcome back to this Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm Mackenzie Frost. I'm joined by state's attorneys from across the state to talk about Maryland's juvenile justice system. Now, let's continue this conversation. City State's Attorney Ivan Bates, you were just getting ready to talk about some of the things that we're seeing, why we're seeing some of the juvenile crimes. What's driving this when it comes to this? You know, the instances of juvenile crime. We just heard from State's Attorney Gibson talk about the readily available guns that we're seeing and the kids having access to this. What's your take?
That's part of it, a large part of it actually. But one of the things I've really noticed, back when I called myself a baby prosecutor, I was in juvenile, and we would have a young person, they would come in, and now the crimes are a lot more violent, the felonies. There weren't as many. But if they came with a violent felony, they could go away to a program for a year, 18 months. If they were really bad and had done something very violent, I remember I once had a 15-year-old kid that shot someone. We sent them to Iowa for 2 years. And now, when you look at the programming that was there, I think, under the previous administration, you had 9 months, maybe a year in some programs. Now, my understanding is with a number of the programs under Schiraldi, they're 2 months apiece, 60 days. And so what you're seeing is fewer programs, and the duration of the programs is not as long. So the young people aren't getting the services that we expect them to receive. We're paying for those services, but they are not getting those services. So if the young people are not getting the services, how can they really learn from their bad behavior and make their changes? I think that's so important. The programming and services for young people, I think, is key.
We hear from a lot of partners, whether it's law enforcement or, state's attorneys, that the programming needs to be increased. But what does that look like? What types of programming does the state need to increase? State's Attorney Dykes, you said on the Eastern Shore, it's limited. And I've heard the same thing in Western Maryland. They don't have that same access to the types of programming that young people need. What types of programming do you need?
It's as basic as substance abuse, mental health. They would be a huge help to us. I mean, our local hospital is working with a local psychologist, and there are partners who have programming in the works, but it's going to take time, and those things just don't exist currently.
And so for DJS to do that, I'm assuming they would need more funding, and that would come from the General Assembly. So do you believe it's up to them to provide them with more funding so that they can provide the level of services and programming that these young people need?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at a kid in trouble, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, there's a family in trouble as well, right? And so wraparound services to help that whole family out, right? Behavioral reprogramming, therapy, drug treatment, mental health treatment, anger management, handling emotional shifts, like mentoring again, having positive, approachable role models that can show you the right way and can address the root cause of why this particular child is in error. That's really critical that we invest in that. It costs money, but that's an investment in our future. It's an investment in our children, and it makes our society safer. So I would encourage the General Assembly to properly fund and vet, because you can't just have any programming. It has to be proper, effective programming. So properly fund and vet the programming and give DGS the resources they need to actually address the issue.
Where does that programming take place? Is it in a detention facility? Is it in the community? Where does that happen?
It depends. It's based on the facts and circumstances of every case. Right. Every case, every juvenile, every family is different. So it depends.
And part of the problem is, I mean, you can have programming, and I absolutely agree with my colleagues that there needs to be more programming. But you can have all the programming in the world, and if you just put people on ankle monitors and don't require their participation in a program and don't monitor the fact that they're doing a program, then yeah, that's not good either. And we've seen a whole host of issues associated with the way in which these ankle monitors are being monitored. So yeah, there's cause for concern there as well.
Yeah, we've done a lot of reporting on ankle monitors when it comes to the use of ankle monitors within DJS. And we found out, that there's 2 different types of ankle monitors, and we learned earlier in the year that DJS is moving towards GPS ankle monitors on July 1st. Do you believe that will provide a better or a more accurate accounting for the young people on ankle monitors?
For those attention methods to work, you need several things. One, proper technology, right? So the technology has to be sound, it has to be bulletproof. It can't be something that can be tampered with easily. You also need proper personnel. So it's not enough that this system is in place. Someone has to be monitoring it and reacting to it. And then you need effective and quick communication. So if there's a breach in one of the conditions of the release, that is readily made available and shared with the courts, the prosecutor's office, the police, all the entities involved, so that we can come together and react to it appropriately. Without those pieces in place, proper technology, proper personnel, rapid communication, the systems don't work.
How do you do that if the relationships with those partners have been broken because of what we've seen over the last couple of years with the leadership?
I think I saw the interview you had with the sheriffs. I think the sheriffs hit the nail on the head. The leadership needs to go out to us, the partners, and reestablish the relationships. We've been very blessed to turn a lot of the crime issues around in Baltimore City because of partnership. We couldn't worry about who was there in the seat before we got there. We were new individuals. We had to go out, reestablish. We had to work with all the partners and say, this is what we're going to do. One of the things that DGS could do, and this is something that really irks me, when you have a young person there on probation and they're 3/4 of the way in terms of completing it, then DGS wants to say, okay, we want to take them off probation. No, they're supposed to finish. Don't take them off because they're getting close. Make sure they finish. And I think DJS needs to make sure they have real leadership that's going to hold people accountable. And that's why I think going out there, reestablishing who you are in terms of the leadership, what your beliefs are, and what your focus is going to be with all of law enforcement and understanding. No one wants to see kids locked up, but we don't want to see kids become adults in the criminal justice system.
Does that happen? Does DJS release kids from probation when they're close to completing?
Yes, every single time. It is a headache that always my prosecutors are like, you won't believe this. And it happens every single time.
You guys are all nodding.
Yes.
Would you all agree?
Common practice.
Yes.
Common practice.
Yes.
Yeah.
You said something earlier, too, about how you're seeing the fact that some of these cases, you're learning about some of these instances of these kids getting dismissed. And how often are cases getting dismissed before you even learn about them?
Quite often. So the way the process works is that once DJS is the gatekeeper, DJS will send us the case. But if DJS doesn't want to send us a case, then we don't know anything about it. And so the law used to be 25 days, now it's 15 days, but they still are the ones who make the decision about what to do. Now they're supposed to send us all the felonies, but look, we saw a program with Sidestep, and we didn't get any of those felonies with unauthorized, some of those car theft cases. So, within the system, it does what it wants to do in the sense the people who are the gatekeepers, DJS, they decide what they want to do. Another thing that really bothers me, they're not lawyers. And therefore, they're making decisions about the elements of crime, having never gone to law school, and I don't know what they've studied.
I'd also just add one thing, which is that when they communicate with us and they do share instances with us, it's really important that we get the history. If you're telling me about this felony and I don't know about what preceded it, I don't know what the interactions were that preceded it, I can't craft an appropriate response. A person who steals one car is going to require a different response than if it's their 15th car. But if I don't know about the prior because of that just wasn't shared with us, and you're telling me about this one now, I can't craft an appropriate solution to the problem because you haven't shared the full magnitude of the problem with us. That's important too. So not just sharing, but sharing all the pertinent details.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think part of the problem is that that was a philosophy that came from the top down under the previous secretary. So hopefully with the new secretary in place, then there'll be a change in that philosophy. Because, more often than not, we just don't know about these things. And how can we offer constructive input if we're completely unaware?
Do you have any indication that that policy or that philosophy will change with this new leadership?
I'll use your word. I'm cautiously optimistic. So I haven't gotten a definitive word yet.
Also, earlier you said that juveniles often, one of the reasons why you want a judicial magistrate to make the decision about detention is kids often don't show up after they're released. How significant is that? How often does that happen in your jurisdictions?
In Howard County, it was a common thing. We saw numerous cases where someone was referred to DJS and the case was closed satisfactorily, and there was no contact. What message does that send to that child, right? That there has to be some accountability. If you care for children, you teach them how to function well in the world. Action and consequence. Good choices, good results. Bad choices, bad results. If you have a child who committed a wrong and you do nothing, and they don't show up at all, and you just close it satisfactorily, that child has not taken any alteration in their path. They're going to become 18, they're going to do the same exact thing, and they're going to be faced with a very significant consequence. And society will look at us funny when we're locking that person up for a long period of time, when it could have all been avoided. We don't want to do that. No one wants to do that. But we will enforce community standards. We will ensure public safety is prioritized, right? And unfortunately, that means that sometimes we take a hard stance when kids turn 18 and they've never properly been corrected or redirected previously.
State's Attorney Dykes, on the Eastern Shore, is that what you're seeing as well, when kids are just not showing up?
So, candidly, I don't have the numbers on that.
Sure.
But it is, the accountability piece is huge. Just as Rich said, if my children in my house are not held accountable, they create chaos. It is no different in our streets. In fact, it's worse, right? You get a bunch of kids groupthink together who lack maturity and understanding of the consequences of their behavior. And we've seen that time and time again. I think people would be surprised to know that on the Lower Eastern Shore, that children continue to be victims and suspects in gun violence at an extremely high rate. In the last 2 weeks, we had a 15-year-old kill a 23-year-old, and we had a 15-year-old who was AWOL from a juvenile placement shot himself. 4 weeks before that, we had a 14-year-old who was shot in the neck and paralyzed. It is not the Sleepy Shore. It is, we are experiencing the same challenges as all our partners across the state.
When we come back from this next break, I want to look at what you all are looking at as the General Assembly begins in January and what your priorities will be. Stick with us. This conversation will continue right after this. Welcome back to this Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm Mackenzie Frost. I'm joined by state's attorneys from across the state to talk about the juvenile justice system in Maryland. And I want to talk about the General Assembly. We have about 6 months until the next session begins. But let's start with State's Attorney Shoemaker. You spent some time in Annapolis working in the State House. Over the years, what are the trends that you have seen compared to your time there and now when it comes to the criminal justice arena and juvenile justice?
So I got elected to the House of Delegates in 2014. So, our first session was in January of 15, I guess. And what struck me right away, right out of the gate, well, I hate to use the criminal coddling term again, but I will. But that's kind of the philosophy down there. And it was very unsettling to me. Right out of the gate, they were reducing mandatory minimums for crimes. They were decriminalizing offenses. They were just bending over backwards to accommodate the criminal community. And if you look at all the polling, Gonzalez, any of them, black people, white people, Democrats, Republicans, they all think that Maryland is entirely too soft on crime. But in my 8 years down there, they doubled down on criminal coddling. And it's continued, exponentially, I guess, in the 2.5 years since I left down there. Just when you thought for a second, maybe the pendulum was starting to swing back in the right direction because, they made some tweaks to juvenile justice reform in this past session. They doubled down on things like the Second Look Act, for crying out loud. So, I am not terribly optimistic about, criminal issues going forward. This is an election year, though, coming up, so maybe that'll temper it a little bit, but we'll see.
Do you believe that Governor Westmore made the right decision in replacing the Secretary of DJS?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was a great move. I wasn't happy, however, that he signed the Second Look Act into law. And, not only did he, sign it into law, he kind of took a victory lap after he signed it, which I found very disturbing. But his move with regard to Schiraldi, I applaud.
Staying in the lane of the Department of Juvenile Services, State's Attorney Bates, looking at what your priorities will be as the president of the State's Attorneys Association, what are you going to focus on next session?
Well, one of the things that we have heard in reference to the incoming secretary is that she's a true believer of automatic jurisdiction, meaning that all juvenile matters should start in juvenile court. So anytime a juvenile is charged with any crime, they should start in juvenile court. We are, as an organization, are adamantly opposed to that. So our entire organization will do everything it can to make sure that doesn't happen for a number of reasons. Number one, we have to be honest. DJS is a mess. With it being a mess, they need to have programming to handle the cases that they have now. They don't. If you start every single juvenile case in the juvenile system, that system will be broken even more so than it is now. And we need to make sure that before we can have the discussion of starting these juvenile cases in the juvenile system, do you have the programming? Do you have the resources? Are you properly staffed? What does the holding facilities look like for the young people who are charged with murder or attempt murder or rape? Or are you going to just let them go back into the community? Understanding if you do have automatic jurisdiction, then you'll have something like we saw down in Mexico with the cartels, now hiring young people to do the violent criminal acts against other people. And now you've even put young people in a greater harm. So we're going to make sure we focus on automatic jurisdiction and making sure that that does not come to pass. That will be definitely not good for the communities in the state of Maryland.
Supporters of it this last session, when they pushed for it, they said that the violent crimes would still start in the adult court system. And they argued that most of these offenses ended up in juvenile court anyway, so it ultimately would save tax dollars. What do you say to that?
It's not necessarily saving tax dollars. They don't necessarily always end up there. what happens is that sometimes as a state we have the opportunity, whether we're going to take a plea bargain or we have an opportunity to find out more about the case, and you allow us, the state's attorneys, the lawyers, to make the decision about where this case will best be tried. Sometimes we recognize this young person could use the services and it's their first time. Their second time, no, that's not a good option. And so it gives the prosecutors the opportunity to say, you know what, we understand that this young person, this is your first time offense. There is a program here. If it's starting in the juvenile system, they're going to sit down and say, you know what, I don't want any program. I don't want any help. I'm good to go. This way we can ensure a lot of times young people receive the service and the help that they need.
State's Attorney Dykes, looking at the automatic jurisdiction, where do you stand on it?
So I agree with Ivan completely. To give DJS, to not allow the court, right, the say in that would be problematic, especially at a point in time where they are overwhelmed. And, you know, there are so many nuances in the law, as we talked about before. Many DJS workers, well, I don't know one that is a lawyer, but that accomplice liability, right? Like complicated legal theories that we may never know about, right? May apply in a case that law enforcement has, if they can go directly to the commissioner and we can solve public safety, that's how it should be.
State's Attorney Gibson, looking at January, what will you be focused on?
So I agree wholeheartedly with our new president, State's Attorney Bates.
Yeah, you handed the torch.
I did. I'm grateful, and he's got it. He's got it. So quickly as to automatic jurisdiction, to give an entity that cannot handle what it currently has, it currently can't handle what's on its plate, and this entity that's struggling under the weight of its current load, you're discussing giving them more. That just logically doesn't make sense. Like, it'd be one thing if DJS was humming along perfectly, and you said, look, they have the bandwidth, they have the capability, they're solving issues, the community is safe, give them these cases. I'm not saying I'd agree with it then, but at least as a conversation that actually makes sense. Right now, it doesn't even make sense. They can't handle their current capacity, and you're trying to give them more. So automatic jurisdiction, I think, uniformly of the 24 electeds is going to be something we're going to be very strongly against. For Howard County specifically, separate issue, we are a community of roadways, and we have seen an increase in road rage instances, proliferation of guns. We've seen road rage instances where people are using guns when they're angry, and there have been guns that have just been brandished, there have been guns that have been shot, there have been people who've died. And I want to try to fashion some sentencing enhancements when a road rage incident occurs within our state. And by the way, the road rage cases we've seen have been involved kids. They've been involved people with concealed carry permits. They misuse those permits, and they've been involved with people that are illegally carrying and using weapons. So we're seeing every variety of it in Howard County, and it needs to be addressed.
That's interesting. What do you think is driving that?
A couple of things. One, again, is proliferation of guns, right?
Sure.
The fact that you can make a gun now.
It's readily available.
Readily available, easily made, and highly lethal, sadly. Two is there's a Supreme Court case, the Bruin case, that required Maryland had to change its laws as well. And so now the concealed carry permits are much more relaxed than they were previously. So more people have guns on the roads. And then finally, it's the psychology of people on the roads. People, when they're in a car, tend to take transgressions that might otherwise be ignored if we were just walking about or moving about in a different mode, in a much more aggressive way, right? And there's a lot less empathy for people around you. Someone's driving slow in the fast lane, someone cuts you off, as opposed to just brushing it off and letting it go. They're engaging, in this instance, what we're seeing is they're engaging with guns violently. It needs to stop.
When it comes to the sentencing enhancement, what would that look like?
So we already have laws that govern the brandishing of a weapon to be a first-degree assault, but the unique nature of a road rage incident is such that it's a highly mobile crime scene. So as opposed to if it was a gun crime that happened on a street where people are on their pedestrian walking, you can freeze that scene, you can lock it down, you can secure all the evidence. On 95, you're not going to lock that down effectively. Due to the highly mobile nature of the types of crimes occurring, witnesses may or may not stay. There are challenges to these cases. There are technological advances too. We have license plate readers, and there might be cameras in the area. But these are challenging cases, and we need to hold people accountable when they use weapons in that setting. And so a sentencing enhancement would be that in addition to the punishment of first-degree assault and hanging crime of violence, there would be an additional, maybe mandatory penalty if it happened in a road rage context. And you could build out elements for that that would support that in sentencing.
When you talk about accountability, obviously that's something that is the overarching part of this whole entire conversation. And State's Attorney Bates, parental accountability has been a part of what you have also talked about in Baltimore City. What does parental accountability look like, and how has that impacted your approach to dealing with young people and juvenile crime?
Well, parental accountability is when that parent has decided they're not going to do their job of supervising that young person. The times that we've been able to prosecute that is often when a young person, we had the incident at the school where the parent took their child up there to the school, they had a gun, and they participated in the beating of another child. So that both the mother and the father we prosecuted. The father's now in prison on the state side and going to eventually make his way to federal prison. But they pled guilty to the count in terms of, basically they were contributing to the delinquency of a minor. We also pled another individual to something similar who had a child they were in charge of, and the child had the gun and killed themselves. And so that is not parents doing their job. One is a parent not being a parent, holding their young people accountable, and the other is the parent not looking out for a young child with a gun. So those are two ways in which we do hold parents accountable. The law is a little difficult when a child is going back and forth in the community and they're being released over and over again. We've spoken to DJS, we've spoken to them about putting something on the forms when they're releasing the children to the parents so that we can make it a little easier to prosecute the parents, to say clearly you knew that if your young person cut up their ankle bracelet or left, that we could hold them accountable. So we're still in those conversations. I know it's something that was supposed to happen under Secretary Schiraldi. Didn't hear anything else about it for a little while. Something that I would definitely bring up with the new secretary. And so there are a lot of ways to do it. It's very difficult, and making sure the elements line up with the crime is very difficult, but when they do, we try to hold the parent accountable.
That's interesting. All right, well, we're going to continue this conversation when we come back, and we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to this Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm Mackenzie Frost, and I'm joined by state's attorneys from across the state to talk about Maryland's juvenile justice system. Now, let's continue this conversation. And State's Attorney Bates, I want to talk about some of the services and the resources that your office has, hyper-specific to Baltimore. I apologize for just 1 second. We were talking about Howard County road rage. Let's talk about some of the resources that Baltimore City has. In your office, the city budget, you were given $400,000, I believe, from the city budget for a body camera review. But also at the same time, it came with a reduction of $112,000 that was given to the City Inspector General's office for an additional agent, for an inspector for whether it's the DPW or DOT. That was at the request of Council Member Odette Ramos. What will that reduction of $112,000 mean for your office in terms of the ability for your office to review cases, or what's the impact going to be?
Well, first of all, I was highly upset because I would think that before a city council member or anyone would take money from a city agency's budget, especially in a citywide elected official, you would at least pick up the phone and explain what you wanted to do. That never happened. To have Councilwoman Ramos take the money, almost like going in the middle of the night and going back and act like nothing happened, was extremely disappointing. However, I had a long talk with the mayor, and there were a lot of agreements. And the mayor, and I want to thank the mayor and his entire staff, they agreed to try to get us at least $400,000. And the mayor was a man of his word, and he did. We also reached out to the governor to say, this is super important. The governor said, okay, I'll try to get you another $400,000. So we're over here, so now we're able to do that. The body-worn camera is going to happen. But it really, all this came about because of the chairwoman, Danny McCray. She was the one who was the glue to kind of let this happen. And she understood how we sent her a letter that showed every single position they talked about we were able to fill or were about to fill or we were already going to hire individuals. Now it's one less individual that we can hire. So does it mean it's going to break us? No. But is it something that you just don't do government like that? But you know what? At the end of the day, it's going to the right office. If we can help another law enforcement official and our IG, who's absolutely, Isabel Cummings, is phenomenal in the work she needs to do. And if you have to take it from our office, I'm not happy the way it happened. Give me a call, we could work this. One of the problems I have is there are hundreds of open pens in other organizations, BPD, DOT. There were so many other places to get the money. But why did you need to come take it from us? And we told you we needed it in the first place. That's something I remember. And hopefully we will continue to work hard for the citizens. We've done less, more with less, and we will continue to do that. But we needed to make sure, and they needed to make sure they took care of our Inspector General. They did, but they just used us.
Mm-hmm. Looking at moving forward with accountability and the Department of Juvenile Services, under this new leadership, the new chapter, Vincent Schiraldi, history at this point. Betsy Fox Tolentino will have to be confirmed, and I have been told that the confirmation process will likely not take place until the General Assembly begins in January. So during a normal confirmation hearing, meetings will take place with the senators, and there will be hearings, and then the votes will take place. What do you think the senators need to do and questions they need to ask during that confirmation process? What information should they be looking for from this new leader to ensure this next chapter moves in the right direction?
So again, I think we want to start with the cautiously optimistic position, right? A change was made. It wasn't made for no reason, right? Governor Moore could have kept the ship with Schiraldi moving forward in the wrong direction. He didn't. He made a choice to remove him and put someone else there. I have to believe and hope that that reflects that he's looking for a different course than what Schiraldi was charting. So most important is what Governor Moore wants, because Secretary Tarantino has to execute his wishes, right? From her, I just want an open dialogue. I'm hoping that we can be good partners. I'm hoping that she will agree that there's an urgency to addressing some of these issues. I'm hoping there's flexibility in how she will approach these issues from different perspectives. And I'm hoping, most importantly, there's a different philosophy. A philosophy that says we need to intervene in a meaningful way in these kids' lives. It is not enough to pass the buck and just close cases satisfactorily without talking to the kids and their family. It's not enough to ignore when these kids are on the wrong path. We're gonna step in, we're gonna support pushing them in the right direction. And that means accountability. Doesn't necessarily mean locking them up. You can do stuff in the community, but it definitely means not ignoring problems. And so I'm hoping that we see that in her.
Well, I mean, the session doesn't start for what, 6 months or whatever it is. So if I were a senator on the Executive Nominations Committee, I would hope to have seen by then some of these policy changes that we've talked about here today. Maybe regarding detention until a juvenile who's charged with a felony or a crime of violence appears in front of a judicial officer. Maybe a change in philosophy regarding ankle monitors and the way in which they're monitored. And if those changes haven't occurred, then I think there needs to be some pretty probative questions from the Executive Nominations Committee as to why they haven't happened.
Hopefully she can build confidence in the meantime with communication with partners. That's the proof's in the pudding, so to speak.
Working with the communication, how often are you looking for that communication? How often do you need to talk to her or members of her staff? The juvenile prosecutors in your offices. What would a positive line of communication look like?
One thing that is with the executive group, the electeds, I think we probably have something back in the fall. I'm sure we'll extend an invitation. Hopefully she can come down and talk to us. But to me, one of the things I think is very important, the governor's giving you a great deal of money. If I'm on that committee, I want to know, what are you doing with the money? Obviously, there's some parts of your organization that's failing. How are you getting rid of them, and what programs are you expanding to make sure young people are properly serviced? I do recognize under the, Governor Moore's administration that he has extended and now has a drug treatment program. I think that's absolutely amazing. But what about the kid that needs to be held for 9 months or 10 months? Where are you going to be? How are you going to use this money to have that type of establishment? And there's a backlog of young people that need services. What are you going to do to make sure you get rid of this backlog? And what within your organization, as they try to say, where are you going to cut the fat from? Because there's people there who, in every organization, that aren't doing the job that you're paying them. How, are you getting rid of them? And what are you doing with that extra money that you're saving from getting rid of them to give the services to the young people? I think, to me, those are the important questions.
You mentioned this earlier. I was talking to 2 sheriffs about this whole process as well, and they said, Carroll County Sheriff Jim DeWeese said that he believes that she is stepping into a department that has a lot of problems and that this is going to take a significant amount of time. Do you think that the public needs to temper their expectations about how long it's going to take before some of these problems are fixed?
So yes, it's a battleship, not a speedboat, right? So you're not going to fix it overnight. But you can look for directionality of intent, right? So what is the secretary saying? What is she conveying to the community? There are executive changes that we discussed earlier. What policy determinations has she made within her agency that she's saying, we've done it this way in the past, as the chief executive, we're going to do it this way now? In terms of communication, what is she doing to reach out to the various entities across the state? At the local level, our prosecutors talk with DJS all the time. Like my juvenile prosecutors have a regular, multiple times a week dialogue with the DJS workers that are, in Howard County, we actually have a good relationship with the DJS workers that are in the field.
We do too.
And I have an utmost respect for them. But they follow policies like everybody else. Who is organizing the machine, and how are they organizing that machine? That's what you need to see, and you look to her to see how she leads in that role.
I know it's only been just over a week, and we're, so far the public has yet to hear from her. How long should we wait before she addresses the people of Maryland?
I mean, she needs to get, I think you owe her, everyone's already said the problem is massive. So you owe her time to get the scale and scope of the problem. And we're all tossing out solutions from our respective camps, but she's got to look at the whole picture. And so she is owed time to, and you say how long? I couldn't tell you days.
Sure.
But like, she's owed time to get a proper visualization of the agency, the issues, the potential solutions, the partnerships that need to be developed, the partnerships that might need to end, resources you need to get. She's the picture, she's the image, of this whole thing. So she's owed that time. Sorry, Jamie.
In fairness, though, she's been there.
Right.
So it's.
She did work in the Department of Juvenile Services. All right, well, I appreciate all of your time. This was a very insightful conversation. Thank you for joining us for this Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Again, thank you to all of 4 states' attorneys for joining us for Fox 45 News. And we will continue to follow the juvenile crime problem and hold DJS and elected leaders accountable. You can follow along both on air and on the Fox 45 News app. I'm Mackenzie Frost. Have a great night.